Dr. Catanzaro, thank you so much for taking the time to visit with me. You are somebody that one of my dear friends, Dr. Petra, thinks the world of, and wanted to have a conversation as we attempt to understand cancer and different ways of going about it. Lots of different opinions and perspectives. And so, if you don't care, if you can give us that introduction and how you got into the world of even having cancer on your radar.
Logan, thanks a bunch for having me on. Quite a journey. I started out, in the aerospace industry first. Interesting because I was in the Air Force and at Boeing in the aerospace, and so I was exposed to technology from a very early period. I spent almost 12 years in aviation, and then I went to medical school and went through the whole process there and my clinical training and the whole bit, and then I entered practice. And then when I got into practice, our clinic was just flooded with people with cancer, and so you hit the ground running, man. You know what I mean? It's a tough one because you come out with all these wonderful knowledge based things that you just expose. It's like you drink from a fire hose, but then when you get out there and try to use it, and you don't know which one to put into practice first. And it's quite a challenge because if you, I never forget my very first patient that came in was brought in by her. She was brought in by her husband. She was carried in. She lost so much. She had stage 4 breast cancer. She lost so much weight she could hardly even talk. I mean, she was so weak, right? And so her husband brought her into the clinic, and this was my very first case. And he said, "Can you please save my wife?"
Mm.
Right? And like I was floored because I was just thinking, what can I do for her? Because she can't eat, because she's very weak. And so that began the whole process of me thinking outside of the box. And that's how this personalized therapeutic journey began. So I started really researching real hard and putting into practice things that nobody else was doing. And first began by isolating fragments, peptide fragments, out of the urine of the patients that had very serious disease, filtrated them, and then re-injected the patients with the peptide fragments. And these patients began getting better, right? So it was stimulating the immune system to begin to fight off the cancer. So as time went on, I developed a team, which we worked together with Dana-Farber Labs, and we had a great team of 5 scientists, including myself. And then we started identifying what those fragments were doing. So, like in other words, we started seeing the pathways that they were influencing, right? So from there, it was build upon build, and we got better and better and better to now where, after 25 years of clinical medicine, I retired because we had a very busy cancer center outside of Seattle, treated many, many patients with successfully stage 4 that had no hope. And then I retired in 2017, and then took a brief break, and then was called back to put into place what we were doing because people were contacting me, patients, friends of patients, colleagues. And so my wife says to me, "I think that you're getting a message that you should be doing something with, you need to be coming back." You know what I mean? It's kind of like that Godfather line, like, just when I was out, they pulled me back in.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. I love it. So, a couple different things. First, I would like to get your perspective on what is cancer. What is going on that starts the process of us having a condition that leads to stage 4 cancer.
Yeah, that's I'll tell you, it's what we see is that due to the changing environment, you know, uh, changing intrinsic factors in the person, like in other words, what they're exposed to, they might have internal weaknesses that actually makes them vulnerable. You put all of these things together, uh, the food supply, which everybody's aware of how it's been tainted, the environment, which, has a lot more exposures and heavy metals and pesticides and this, all these different things that are toxins, they hit our bodies sideways. And, the body tries to make the adjustments. Uh, and you know what? Our bodies are an amazing, miraculous, creation, basically. I mean, you think about it, we have the best engineering in our bodies possible. So we're always, we're always fighting off the elements. We're always fighting against the cancerous process. But sometimes the gradient with the cancer is higher than the ability to defend. And when that happens, then if you don't get ahead of that gradient, then the cancer begins winning the race, so to speak. So that's why, uh, a lot of times that, minimizing the exposures is good, clean eating, good exercise, pure water, fresh air, all of those different things are factors, in good nutrient base. All of these things are important for resilience, and they'll really help significantly. But sometimes it's not enough. Sometimes the corrective mechanisms and the signals that are provoking the cancer still persist because of the resistance. And that's when you need the extra help of understanding how to intelligently navigate, because you can't, you can't keep on throwing things at something, right? If you don't have the really underlying, causative factors or the root cause. And what Neo 7 Bioscience is doing through molecular surveillance is we identify those hidden faults that are resistant, that are allowing the cancer to persist. And the cancer itself is a multimodal type, multifactorial, multi-target event. So in other words, it's never about the one single thing that's gone wrong. It's about a coordinated dance that, if it's going the wrong way, then it's going to take the coordinated effort to understand what the complexity is to get back to the central movement to correct. And so, and a lot of the times conventional medicine, conventional medicine is kind of like a one vein, one size fits all type of deal, where it's never effective enough to, I mean, they just throw chemo at it, or they throw radiotherapy at it, radiation, or they throw, surgery, try to remove it with the surgery, or they'll try to use some heavy biologics to try to get to the crooks. But the whole thing is that it's only one target. It's only one way. And believe me, the cancer knows how to work around things. So, and a lot of the times these conventional therapeutics they're a lot more harmful than they are helpful, right? I mean, they're not strategic, they're not direct in targeting, and they certainly don't allow for good recovery and resilience, right? So there you have the long answer to a very complex process.
Yeah, it is complex. And the more you get into all of the different quote unquote experts in their given field, right? Like, so it's a Warburg metabolism, it's a parasites, it's fungal, it's a virus,
Right.
it's all the different components. Quite a few studies coming out relatively recently that all the tumor biopsies did have a fungal component to it. All of them do have a complete microbiome, right? Like a lot of different
Yes.
things going on. So that's where I think that we get in an interesting situation on the approach, because I don't personally think that cancer is a fungus or a parasite. I think that's a downstream event. I think that that's where we still need to have some sort of a conversation around antiparasitics and antifungals as being a part of a protocol. That just seems like we're up against this very strong headwind of even having that conversation, right? So how do you view that aspect of some of these other alternative modalities and therapeutics, and this, like, what is cancer based on, the different theories?
Yeah, I mean, excuse me, if you actually think about it, when we're talking about the microbe world and parasites and, foreign elements coming in, there is definitely a relationship there. So in other words, it's important to be addressing the microbiome shifts, because the microbiome is actually like the largest sphere of being able to coordinate a good, healthy housekeeping of the body. And when we're talking about, a lot of exposures that way, it's important to address them and directly, but it's also important to understand why the person is susceptible to it, and how can you navigate from a hub strategy more efficiently, right? And when you combine the elements of these protocols that help to eliminate and help to address the immune responses, these are all very favorable type of approaches. And if a person has got a chronic pattern and you see that it's still not enough, then that means that there's an inherent molecular disturbance that somewhere along the line the organism has shifted. And, like, in other words, the organism goes in there like Lyme disease, like the Lyme organism goes in there, creates its crazy pattern, and then it's no longer, maybe you eliminated the organism, but the collateral damage that had occurred from knocking the immune system sideways and all of the inflammatory cascade sideways and all the regulatory signals sideways. So it's kind of like it's no longer about where's Waldo. Waldo already created havoc in the classroom and he's gone. It's like the classroom is disordered and here you go.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think it's important for there to be that, relationship there, to be able to use the best of the best and the more precision like strategies to allow for the recovery to happen and the resilience to happen. And so it's like never about one single thing. It's about the combination of the most effective strategies together. And the brain gut axis is very important, because the brain gut axis, I usually say, and I've said this many times in other podcasts that I've been a guest on, is that the body has an amazing ability to forward and reverse engineer itself, right? It just has a natural reflex to do that. But whenever something comes in to hit the body sideways, like, for instance, the mRNA vaccine complications and injuries that we're hearing a lot about, and its effects on DNA, then boom, it's like, what do we do, right? We got to know. We got to know what it actually, what kind of expression changes it actually caused, and go after it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I do. I want to circle back and go to that, but one thing kind of top of mind, Petra shared a beautiful perspective you had on mindset, and after the years and years of clinical practice that you've had, go into how you view that. How have you seen outcomes and mindset correlated?
Yeah, that's a great thought pattern there, because when we talk about mindset, it's usually how are you going into something and what kind of output you're going to get. Like, for instance, if a person, and you know what, sometimes the person that's struggling with the process, is usually more game to really figure out what the process is. They just need some help because maybe they're weak and tired. But a lot of the time, their mindset is like, I'm fighting this. I'm going for it. I'm not going. It's not going to beat me, right? And when you're going in there with a resilient mindset, you're basically telling the rest of your systems, you're giving the rest of your systems the permission to actually become more peak efficient in the response. And so I usually look at it from the standpoint that if you have a mindset that is not healthy, and you're focusing on the disease process rather than focusing in on the ability to generate healing and recovering, then you set yourself at a disadvantage, right? So I like to say that you should be viewing yourself as a person that's well, trying to fight off an element that your body's exposed to, rather than a person that's sick trying to fight off a disease that you think is going to ultimately win. Because these are the people that usually recover and they move past some serious, very serious things that I've seen through the years. They're well people going to recover rather than sick people succumbing to the disease. You know what I mean?
I think it's beautiful. That's one of the things I feel like we got lucky on with my son was to never ever let him think that he was sick. It was everything that we did was, hey, this just makes us stronger. This is it's always that improvement. And you know, had a lot of influences on that, like Jason Redman. He
Yes.
Navy SEAL that has a beautiful book and his struggles, and he shared a lot of things because we all get hit with those life ambushes, right? Um, thinking back to more stuff with Lander was I let him be a kid too. So he was 5 when he was diagnosed stage 4 Wilm, so kidney, and he played outside. He ran around. He was a kid. He was never coddled like he was sick. And I just think that that's a big deal.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I agree 100% because, the resilience is there. It's like, when you talk about a constitutional energy of a young child, I mean, it's like they'll run circles around us naturally, right? So it's like, let's harness their energy because, and look, there's nothing that's going to impede that. And I've seen amazing things happen with young people, especially like with autism where you've got some significant mitochondrial disturbances there, but we were able to overcome them because the drive of the child was, even though the child was experiencing impairment, there was still that drive for them, that like they had that internal constitutional rhythm and energy to want to be able to talk, to want to be able to be normal, right? You know what I mean? So, and you capitalize on that energy and realize that it's a spiritual force. I mean, it's something that really is a top to toe, energetic movement of activity and hopeful, very hopeful, enhancing strength that we have. And if we can just harness that, even as a people that are more mature in our age, look, I've seen this with people. Like, for instance, we have a near 80-year-old male who had a real severe bad prostate cancer, and his PSA levels were like 4,000. Can you imagine that? I mean, it's a PSA of 4,000 when it's supposed to be less than 2. And he didn't have a prostatectomy. So in other words, he didn't have his prostate wasn't removed. So he still had his prostate, and he did everything integratively possible to strengthen his body. And he did a great job, but it wasn't taking care of the cancer. And his cancer got worse and spread to the bone, to the liver, everything else. By the time he came to us at Neo 7, he actually had, besides the 4,000 PSA, he had tumors in his neck, tumors in his groin, tumors in his abdomen. He gained like 41 pounds of metastatic fluid in his body.
Wow.
It was terrible, right? Within 8 weeks of receiving his personalized treatment, the guy's PSA level dropped down to like 40. And then his PAP, which is another indicator, dropped down to like 20 because that was elevated too. His tumors in his neck and groin and abdomen begin shrinking, right? And now he's down to like PSA 12, a PAP of about 14, no more tumors, right? No more fluid. The 41 pounds of fluid gone, right? And this is an 80-year-old. And you know what really kept him in the game is that he loves life and he wants to live life, and he's focusing in on, he's the well person fighting off the thing that he's exposed to that he needs to get rid of, rather than being succumbing to the disease process itself, right? So anyway, these are the type of people that we have an opportunity to work with, and we see amazing recovery because of that mindset.
Yeah, I think it's just so unbelievably important. Can you think back and early on, and maybe your initial consultations, if there was a way that you were able to pick who was going to beat it and who wasn't? Obviously not 100%, but was there indications there?
Yeah, that's another one too that really kind of brings me back to a time when I was clinically working, in the integrative oncology, and I've seen so many people, and I saw this one young lady, she married and she had a couple of children, She had lung cancer, but never smoked, right? Nobody in her family ever had lung cancer. It just didn't had no rhyme or reason as to why she would have lung cancer. And when she came in, she was always smiling, and she always had the greatest disposition. And her mindset was not a problem with regards to her loving life. And I was constantly asking the question to myself, like, why is this hideous disease in her body, right? Because she just seems to be so energetic and have a good disposition. And I wasn't able to figure it out for the long. You good?
Yeah, I had a little kid at the market come start knocking on the glass of the door. So go back
Oh
a
yeah.
little bit, just recap just a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. So this woman that I was telling you about, young, lung cancer, not having any history of it in the family, it made no rhyme or reason as to why she was suffering with such a hideous disease, and because she had such a great disposition. So for months and months, we were treating her, but it seemed like the cancer was getting progressively worse, and we were doing everything that we could possibly do. And then one time her husband showed up at the clinic, and he came in, and he was the most hostile individual I've ever seen. And so one all of a sudden, you know I get this like affirmation from, from the inside, it's God talking to you about this. There is where her problem is, right there. That person, that person is the cancer in her life. And that's kind of hard for people to even hear. Now, when I got that affirmation, I was not going to go back to her and say, you need to get rid of that guy. Uh, you know,
But
no,
she
I
did.
just
Yeah.
I firmly was, really thinking like, you really need to get rid of that guy. It's like, you know what I mean? But the thing is that I was carefully, working with her to really build upon build, like getting her to realize that the most important person on the planet right now is you, and what you're doing in your journey is so important for you, right? Not for anybody else. And the interesting thing about it is all the people like in the IV room, because she told her story, and there were like two or three women that said, you need to get rid of that guy. It didn't come from me. It came from the support that in the IV room where she was getting treatment. Like, you need to get rid of that guy, right? So they were all able to identify where the cancer really was, right? And that's kind of an example of how sometimes it's a lot more, it has a lot more involved in what you think initially than just the cancer, right? So.
Yeah, I think that's pretty evident. Something else you sparked when you said lung cancer and never smoked. Um, it seems like we have this massive elephant in the room that nobody really talks about in SV40. And Artie Garzda showed that all the mesothelioma cancers had SV40. So, do you have any thoughts on that topic? I know we weren't really prepped for that, but like I think it's a big deal, and we never talk about it. And it's crazy to me because I feel like it's fundamental.
It is a fundamental issue because SV40 is a plasmid that was used in formulations of vaccine formulations. The people are exposed to it. It's a contaminant. It's a toxin. It actually creates a very a high amount of stress on the cellular activity in our body. I mean, it's a terrible thing, and it is a problem. And SV40, because it's a plasmid, it influences DNA integrity. So DNA, if the integrity is compromised in DNA, the bad signaling goes on and propagates in an exponential fashion, right? Because and then when you talk about the ability to repair, the DNA is crippled, and it's not able to repair itself appropriately because of this SV40. And that's one of the things that we're addressing in the mRNA vaccine related complications and injuries, because we see spike elements, we see spike fragments, we see poly A tails, we see mitochondrial fragments of nucleotides. We see, globin fragments. We see a bunch of different things that are all corrupting the natural, balance of the cell. And the cell has a stability and a good housekeeping going along for good, healthy resilience. These things come in and it's like chaos, right? It's a big raging fire. And but the thing is that there's a way of getting into that solution where how do we get the body back to its original equilibrium? We want to get that equilibrium going. We got to work at getting it back, but you got to know what that exposure is. So SV40 is a contaminant, it is a toxin, it is a problem.
I feel like it's everywhere. Too. I think it's in the blood supply. I think it can be passed on maternally.
Yes,
I think that we've got a big issue on our hands, honestly. And then we know that SV40 promoters are in Pfizer. I think that's been proven over and over. So,
absolutely.
The trying to understand Fritz Pop's work, okay, and biophotons and all of this, what it appears to me is part of what SV40 is doing is it is darkening or silencing P53. And so the way that Petra and I have really been laying out how we talk about cancer and cells is it's like an orchestra, right? It's a symphony, yes. And all the pieces have got to be performing on point, right? And when we talk about this symphony, we're talking a lot about light, right? The biophotons, delayed luminescence, mitochondria, nanobubbles, glycocalyx, DNA, chromatin, right? All of it interconnected. So when we look at a lot of these botanicals or compounds, they have a certain emission and absorption spectrum too that I find fascinating on where they fall. So do you have any thoughts on that work? Because it seems like Fritz Pop has been completely ignored. Van Wyck has kept his work going, and Maywin Ho. Like there's some that have done some amazing work. Her book Rainbow and the Worms, absolutely incredible. So do you have thoughts on how to look at that? Because John, there's not very many people that want to have this conversation.
Yeah, I think that these, conversations are necessary because when we take a look at the biophysics of what's going on in the relationships of these molecular elements, I mean, everything is affected by light, by electrophysiological forces. I mean, mechanical forces, right? I mean, these things are important to understand. And when we're talking about, trying to be much more intelligent about our approaches in how to help people to adapt better against their exposures, you actually have to know how to go about that, right? Because there is that biophysical relationship. We actually see that with cancers and their ability to remodel a tumor environment, a tumor microenvironment. A tumor microenvironment is shaped by many influences, what we call the physical influences, biophysical influence. So the physics and the counterintuitive process of that is something that is necessary to understand. Because remember when I said the body has an amazing ability to forward and reverse engineer itself? Well, guess what? There are physiomechanical activities that are part of that process. And, when we talk about, ionic controls, photodynamic controls, electrostatic attractions on physical shapes and forms. All of these things are important when you're trying to understand a disease process, because the physical shapes and forms are then characteristically changed when there's exposure, right? And so these works that you're talking about have laid the groundwork for us to understand on a much deeper level. Some people are not ready to understand it necessarily, but they are very much groundwork for the process of function and or the adverse events that affect function. So, yeah.
And this conversation is completely omitted from mainstream oncology, right? Like this is radiotherapy or chemo surgery. That's really the only now some immunotherapies, but if we can reharmonize that symphony that's going on. I mean, Pop laid out the biophoton emission was erratic in cancer, and it didn't last very long. Versus a healthy tissue, it was coherent and it had a longer term of delayed luminescence. So
Right.
when we're talking about whether it's Neo 7, it is something like, I don't know, B17 or some of the other things that have popped up. Do you believe that any of them are harmonizing, or are we still in the context of kill the cancer?
Yeah, I think that we're trying to find that middle relationship when we talk about regulators like B17 and you mentioned like P53, which is a pivotal regulator, tumor suppressor regulator. So it's like, when you have in the body, you have an altered means of when the body's disoriented and a tumor suppressor becomes a tumor promoter, which can happen. So in other words, all of a sudden, a suppressor is not doing its suppressor job. It's totally disoriented because of various downstream signals that are hitting it. I mean, if you looked at P53 and the string relationships, P53 will be in the center, but it actually has something like 200 core sister-related downstream effectors that can actually send information to it that may not be good information. So when we talk about the, bio luminescent movement and the actual influences and how characteristically those cells are vibrating with that kind of energy light, you're talking about some significant changes within the dynamics of the nucleus and the mitochondria and the endoplasmic reticulum, which are all cross-talking all the time. So like that P53, bottom line is you got limp along mitochondria on a global scale, your P53 is going to definitely not do what it's meant to do in the system and regulating. So I think it's really important for that to be definitely considered, and know that some of these agents that you're talking about do have some corrective action to it, but due to the complexity of the protein to protein interactive complexity that's happening on such an exponential time signature, it's really hard to say, okay, this thing would do this, and maybe it's going to help with that too. Look, it can help. It might, but it's going to hit the limitation button too, because it's a lot more complex than that. And I think that we have been focusing on, it's like it's never about the one thing, it's about the combination of things. But if you have an intelligent hub driver, then you're actually able to coordinate and triage appropriately, what comes in and what rotates out, and you know, and kind of cycle it, have this cyclical thing, because the body likes more of a cyclical movement because it's energetically designed that way. So, you know,
Yeah, there's a couple things. It makes me go straight to the energy, and you said cycle. That's what has been a little challenging for me early on to grasp, because you think of the cell like a battery, right? Like we need to be charged in to recover, but it's more of a dissipative structure, right? Like, so it is always in movement. The only time we're not in movement is when we're dead, right? Rigor mortis. So like it's that constant orchestra playing, or things go off. And so I think of like when St. Georgie, in one of his talks, said that proteins look like they have a electric structure, right? And then Robert O'Becker takes that and goes with it and proves all kinds of phenomenal things that we're also not taught, right? Like nobody knows Robert O'Becker, and he was as credentialed as I guess you can be. So the electromagnetic component to cancer seems so significant to me, and it is completely ignored. And so what I believe is the massively missing part in oncology is that we don't embrace the environment or the sun. I think that is just crazy to me when you look at the downstream effects of all the different spectrums. All the cleavage products of POMC, vitamin D versus synthetic vitamin, like on and on and on, right? So to
Yeah.
me, I just don't think that any protocol has, in my opinion, right, like the validity if we're not getting the environment and getting the sun piece right.
No, I am full agreement with you because ultimately, at the end of the day, the ability to epigenetically shift and adapt it depends upon what kind of internal programming we have of the organism, right, and how we're adjusting to the environmental control that we see out there, and it all comes back to that because we are definitely electromagnetically and physiologically very powerful beings, right? Because that's part of we are polar beings. So we look, I mean, it's like the atoms, that are working within the physics of our body that are happening all the time. These are definitely part of, think about it from the standpoint of the energy of the universe and the relationship of the human body. They're one and the same. They really are, because there's that power command happening on the inside of us, and we can see it in our organelles. We can see it in different aspects in the compartments in the cell, how it works. I mean, think about the mitochondria when we talk about mitogenesis. Mitochondria, think about the concept of mitogenesis and producing thousands upon thousands of mitochondria. And then you got, as part of that process, the mitophagy, which clears the fragmented mitochondria, right? So I mean, think about the electron transport chain and the amount of voltage that's going through there to to coordinate the events of our cell. I mean, there's a whole complex coordinated there in the mitochondria. It's powerful. It's a powerhouse. Just the concept of ATP generation and how that works, the physics of it is it's a dynamo that we haven't harnessed the whole part of that physical relationship,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I think I was just talking to Jack Cruz the other day about this, and we had referenced heteroplasmy, and I asked him about basically this uh, photonic zip code, right? Like different tissues having a different
Right.
redox state, a different heteroplasmy, and that's why Wilms tumor pops up versus Parkinson's versus whatever condition that we are seeing, and I think that's a fascinating way of looking at it. That it's the if the cell is an orchestra producing a symphony, and then the tissue is made up of a lot of orchestras producing a symphony, and then that tissue makes up an organ that is a symphony, right? And then the different organs create a body and there's so many pieces going on at once. And when you have one orchestra out of whack in that entire system, that photonic zip code that I'm talking about, it is just a very fascinating way of looking at that. So how in your opinion, twofold. One, how did you go from conventional medicine to being able to have this conversation? For one, that just tickles me. And then two, how do we get back in harmony?
Well, I mean, from the journey from the conventional part, I saw the underlying flaws of conventional medicine, which is totally it's based on rational, a system of rational and not really good rationale either. I mean, a lot of the times it's a prognostic, diagnostic, and fatal type of system because it's not doing anything to power you up. It's doing everything to break you down. And I didn't want to, you know what I'm saying? I didn't want to go into that type of medicine. So I just said, I want to go into a medicine that's going to be constitutionally charging you up. And I had the first experience of doing that when my daughter had this as status asthmaticus, which is a chronic asthma that we were taking her to the emergency room like every 2 days, and she was getting progressively worse. And I said, we can't keep on doing this. She's not doing well. So it challenged me to say, hey, there's got to be something better out there. And that's when I got into integrative medicine because through Bastyr University, took her and we got her on a program that was outlined for her. And like within a period of 2 weeks, She was better by eliminating, allergens, eliminating things in the environment, strengthening her intrinsic mechanisms of her immune system, getting her real strong. And conventional medicine wasn't doing any of that. They were just throwing more and more, you know, it's about invasive modalities in conventional medicine. It's never about the more gentle stimulation to get you stronger, right? So that transition there, I mean, that was like the very core of what drove me into a more constitutional, energetic type medicine that was more effective, and it enabled the person to get better rather than keeping them into the disease state, finding the root cause and addressing it with the good things that power up the body, basically, right? In a very basic way. And then, going forward, people need to really harness the their power, so to speak. They got to know that they're the principal drivers of the decisions that, like you were just sharing about your son earlier. I mean, it's that is the power point there, that they need to be really building upon that foundation and realizing that they can make these decisions. They can acquire the knowledge necessary to make these decisions, and they may be challenged by the conventional system, but that's okay. Forget about them, because they're fear-based, they're, they're negative in their approaches. They don't really power you up with life. They always pronounce the bad news. Look, get out of that, move, and realize that there are things out there that are very powerful that will pull you out of situations that you may be in your health in a very positive way, and you will get healthy and you will recover, right? And you've experienced that yourself, I'm sure, as I have as well, So the transition is precision and personalized medicine is what's going to be unique for me as a person to be able to get stronger, get healthier, and not be vulnerable to any disease, right?
Yeah. What are your thoughts on utilizing CT or cold thermogenesis in this harmonizing protocol? Obviously, there's an N of one for everybody, but what are your thoughts on that? Because I feel like there's a pretty strong biophysics and bioluminescence aspect to the cold therapy, and I don't think it's what we hear from influencers of what cold therapy is actually doing.
Yeah, I think, again, when we're talking about the complexity of what your body systems need, when we're looking at that type of, we're going back to what we call counterintuitive process, right? I mean, you're talking about engineering, modalities that going back to Earth, the Earth elements, the water elements, the fire elements. I mean, it's kind of like, look at all this stuff here and how you're going to be influencing the body's position. I remember reading the book about the body electrics and the command of body electrics all the way through every system of our body. And we can't ignore it. We can't ignore this. It's just that it's hard to explain unless you are, really someone that thinks outside the system. And like yourself, I mean, you're constantly looking at the physio-mechanical dynamic relationships that affect the body position, and it's important to know that resilience and longevity, it's all about absorbing that good energy. And so, like for instance, now they're looking at NMR and seeing how NMR can actually assist in various type of reset mechanisms in the body, where they use NMR to help reprogram the magnetic arrangement of how our hydrogens and oxygens behave in the tissue, right? So they're doing what we call therapeutic NMR. And look, I mean, there's a lot to these physical modalities that when we talk about more high energetic physics and the involvement there, a lot of these ionotherapies, light therapies, tumor treating field therapies, where you're talking about electrostatic impulses that are going to really focus in on helping, minimize the likelihood of bad tissues forming. I mean, there's power in those type of approaches. There really are. And if you put them in the right place, and then you know how they can apply and accent the body's ability to recover, then, you get to see some pretty amazing effects.
Well, I have seen some mind blowing things, and the other component that just is a super wow to me is it literally costs nothing for me to drive up an hour from here and go swim in the Little Red River in the sunshine. You know,
Yeah,
nothing.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. If you get into going into soaking in in salt water, or if you go to a salt room, or you go to any of those things that are going to ground you as a human, because a lot of the times our body's in the fight, flight, fright movement. It goes back to Hans Selye's work of the continuous alarm response. Your body's moving into this alarm phase all the time. And several scientists have always looked at. I don't know if you're familiar with Jeffrey's work, but he's talking about how to use cortisol, pulsed cortisol, to realign the body's circadian rhythm. I mean, it's like these are all important things when we talk about light and water, and getting into the five elements. These are all important things to realize, that these forces of nature were designed for us to benefit from. So, getting out there and see the green trees, like in East Texas. I mean, East Texas has some of the most beautiful trees you've ever seen. And I get out there and I'm just always remarking on the beauty of the green trees and the singing birds in those trees. It's kind of like that in itself. When you start taking in that environment and the water and the sun, man, that's powerful,
Super
right?
healing. You just keep going a little more east, and you're over there with me in Arkansas. You just keep going.
Yes, that's
Uh,
right.
what as we wrap up, let's just play through a scenario of a brand new prostate cancer diagnosis, right? And then you're going to give them maybe not necessarily just straight medical advice, but hey, these are some things that you need to consider and implement.
Yeah, I think that the first thing is you identify what your what your goals are that you want to achieve, and really be seriously thinking about, like, am I focusing in on the disease, or am I focusing on my ability to heal and recover? So I think the very first part, like we talked about, the mindset is really essential. Make up your mind what your focus is, because if you're focusing in on the disease, you're going to get more of it. If you're focusing on the ability to get well, you're already past the 50% mark of recovery, right? So you already put yourself over that middle line, right? And anything that you do that adds in to feed that, whatever modality, whatever nutrient, whatever diet, whatever precision or personalization that you put in there, it's going to drive you way toward the 100% goal, right? So what puts you over the 50% line is your mindset. Like, if my mindset is not really where it's supposed to be and it's focal point disease, I'm below that line. I'm not above the line. I'm below it. Mathematically and exponentially, I'm below it. So how can your body possibly fight that gradient if it's below that line, right? You know what I mean? That definitive line. Push past that line and move toward that 100% and stay there, and don't give up. Keep on letting the things that come into you that feed your ability to resist that disease process, because it's no longer the focus, right? And then your body has free course to be able to assemble in the direction of what your ultimate goal is to become free of it completely. It's when we kind of doubt that process and we question ourselves and we don't really set the definitive line that we often have a problem. I've seen this over and over again in many patients, that they have a lot of patients that have come in to see me were already over that line, moving in the upward gradient toward complete recovery. And they got there. The people that oscillated and kind of did this number, their energetics definitely reflected their body's response.
I think you tied a nice little bow on how important that mindset is.
Yes, for sure. Big part. Big part.
So where does somebody go if they want to learn more about your work, about Neo 7, working with you or within your group? Where do we send them?
Well, they can find more about it on the neo7.com. Just go on the website and you can learn about us. We work with Dr. Petra a lot and other doctors too. She's a real wonderful practitioner, wonderful person, beautiful person, and she's always about we're not focusing on the disease, right? We're focusing on your body's ability and its miraculous ability to recover. And everything she does, she puts into that process. So it's a pleasure working along with her because we're one and the same as far as energetics are concerned, and getting people to their goals, right? So Dr. Petra is another place that the person can go and work with her. But we have Neo 7 Bioscience has a lot of clinics that we work with, a lot of great practitioners, and you can find possibly one in your location to hook up with. We have quite the amazing technology that we work with now that really has helped so many people come out of some serious disease patterns. So we're pretty excited about seeing the results we've been seeing.
That's awesome. It's wonderful. Seems like we're kind of on the edge of a cancer tsunami too. Looks like it's about to get pretty ugly. It's
Yeah,
already getting ugly. So
yeah,
um, the resources and these conversations are just going to become more valuable over time, I believe.
me too. I agree. Yep.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time. It has been a pleasure. I appreciate all the work you're doing, the work you're putting out, and it means a lot. It's a big deal.
Thank you, Logan, and thank you for what you're doing. You're doing a great job in getting the word out, educating people. That's wonderful, and I thank you for having me on.
Thank you. Thank you.